We come on now to our next insight session, which is around legal considerations for startups, the practical advice that's needed. Kalpna.
Yeah. What a great day so far. I'm just speechless, really, listening to Anne, and so much to take in, and still so much to learn, and still so much to come. And as entrepreneurs, we have to start as well somewhere legally. So we've got Bevan Brittan here today, who are going to tell us what are the key legal considerations for startups. This is an opportunity for you to send your questions. You can name yourself or make them anonymous. It's a real opportunity to get too close to a legal firm and ask those questions. What are the legal considerations that I need to think about? So we'll start by hearing from Bevan Brittan, from Ben Harris, Marti, Burgess and Rachel Newman. And they're going to outline what you should do and what you should avoid doing. So we'll start with that and then we'll go into questions. Welcome, Ben, Marti and Rachel.
Thank you, Kalpna. So just to introduce us and Bevan Brittan, we're a full-service law firm. We've kind of got a national presence, and the three of us are based in Bristol. One of the reasons we're really pleased to be sponsoring EntreConf today. It's been so great seeing so many fantastic speakers. One of the key reasons we're sponsoring is to draw attention to our new startup package. And as part of this, you'd get a dedicated solicitor as your relationship manager. You get expert support from us, as well as many other legal disciplines across our team, from corporate, commercial, intellectual property, employment tax, and even things like procurement and competition, as well as there are discounted fees available for qualifying companies. I'm going to say a little bit about initial considerations on incorporation and kind of getting your constitutional documents right. And Rachel is going to talk about some employment considerations. Then Marti will finish with just flagging a few issues on intellectual property. There'll be kind of 10-15 minutes for questions at the end, but also contact details are in the slides. So feel free to reach out to any of us after this presentation. I'll be really happy to answer your queries. So moving on to the initial incorporation considerations, one of the first things you'll want to decide on is what the right vehicle is for your business. And there are a few options here. I'll mention briefly sole trader and partnership, and that's where you work either individually in your own capacity or as a partnership with other individuals. These tend not to be used so much for startups, and while they're quite low maintenance in terms of administration, you just need to register with HMRC. The key issue with these is that you remain personally liable for the liabilities of the business, which is why the majority of startups tend to go with who are operating for profit, tend to go with a company, a limited liability company with shares. And the benefit of this is you're not personally liable for the debts of the business. And another key consideration here is that you're able to issue further shares for investment, which is a key way of raising capital for a startup. One other one just worth mentioning is if you're a not-for-profit venture with charitable purposes, you may want to look at incorporating as a charitable incorporated company, which has various benefits. One of the key ones is if you're looking for grant funding, it's a strong signal that you have a charitable focus. So assuming that you're going ahead on the limited liability company basis, one of the first things you'll have to consider is who you're going into business with and how to record the terms of those relationships. So you may be at the stage where you're looking at going to business with a co-founder, or you may remain the majority shareholder in your business, but you may bring in minority shareholders who might have particular roles, so advisors or mentors or people like that who might want an interest. So before you start giving away or sharing any equity, you want to consider the terms on which you're giving that share of your business away. And that's when shareholder agreements and your articles of association come into it. So that's where you'll record those sorts of terms. So at a very high level, things to consider if you're going to business with a co-founder, it's thinking about what you'll do if you don't agree, if you want some mechanisms for one of you to be able to buy the other out and go forward with the business on your own. But it's avoiding a situation where you're effectively in a deadlock company and you can't decide on a way forward. If you're giving away smaller shareholdings, then you might want to consider. You just want to be very clear on what you're expecting in return for giving away that, for issuing those additional shares, and you might want to consider how you're able to get those shares back if that doesn't work out. So the key things are, just ensuring all parties are very clear on what's expected in return for those shares. Of course, you want to surround yourself with good advisors on tax, accounting, assurance, legal as well as general business considerations. And you'll want to think about how you're going to finance the business, whether that's out of your own personal funds, whether you're looking at equity finance, so that might be an initial seed round with kind of family and friends investors or potentially angel investors. There is, of course, also debt finance. So if we're able to borrow money to progress your business, then you won't have to give up equity. And there's also alternative funding available, whether that's kind of grant funding or crowdfunding. So moving on to the next slide. It's important to start and operate your business in a way that's going to be attractive to a funder. And obviously, that's having a great product that's going to make money. There's been lots of other talks on that today. But also, you want to show that the business is well run and that you've been managing your legal risks. So that will start with things like showing that the relationship between the shareholders are sorted under shareholder agreements and things like that. That could be terms and conditions tailored to your particular business, and that could include payment terms in your favour to make sure you're getting paid within a reasonable period of time, and also setting out your limitations on liability, so you could have enforceable limitations of liability in your terms and conditions. It's also showing that you've dealt appropriately with all your regulatory obligations. An obvious one that will apply to lots of businesses is GDPR, but then there may be, depending on what sector you're working in, there may be other regulatory obstacles that you need to clear. So an investor will want to see that you've got all the necessary licenses and authorizations to be operating in your area. And then you'll also want to have documented terms with any key suppliers to the business. And over and above that, you'll also want to ensure that you've got your employment and intellectual property elements covered off, because investors will want to see that. So on those points, I will pass over to Rachel to take us through some key considerations for employment.
That's great. Thanks, Ben. So good afternoon, everyone. And yep, as already introduced, my name's Rachel and I'm an associate in the employment team here at Bevan Brittan. And I'll just briefly take you through some of those key employment considerations. Won't have time to go through them in detail, but do feel free to ask questions on any that are particularly important to you. So firstly, looking at contracts of employment, and the law is really clear on this area that an employer must provide anyone who's classed as an employee with the terms of their employment in writing in what's known as a written statement of employment particulars. And that's often actually just put into a contract of employment, and it must contain terms such as hours, pay, and it is really important because it will also set out what the responsibilities are between you and any employee. The law also confirms what information needs to be provided when, and those timeframes are really important. So it is essential to kind of get all of that sorted at the very outset before you start engaging anyone. And it's worth having perhaps at least a couple of contracts in place, so one perhaps for the more junior employees and one for those that are more senior. And if you're going to be an employee of the business as well that you founded, it's worth having a contract in place, because this is something that a future investor would want to see. Having those contracts does provide clarity and reduce the opportunity for disputes to arise, which is great. The less disputes there are, the better. But the law does change quite regularly in that department as to what needs to go into a contract and what doesn't. So that's having templates, but making sure they're also kind of kept up and audited on a regular basis. And then something we won't have time to go into in detail, but post-termination restrictions. So are there certain groups of employees that you'd want to be able to prevent leaving you and going straight to a competitor? Next is a very quick word on freelancers or contractors. So an alternative to employing individuals is using freelancers. And I'm sure that's something you're all very much aware of. And just the same as with employees, it is really important to have those clear contractual terms in place just to kind of govern how the relationship's going to work, and set out clear standards and service parameters, just so you know what you're expecting and the freelancer knows what's expected of them. There's also tax and employment status considerations with engaging freelancers, which is quite a complex area. So if you are going to look at using freelancers, it's worth perhaps exploring that a bit further. Moving on to recruitment and equal opportunities. So as I'm sure you're aware, it is unlawful for employers to discriminate against anyone on the basis of a protected characteristic. So that's things such as ethnicity, gender, age, disability. And that's important even before an individual becomes an employee. During the recruitment process, there are multiple stages where employers can inadvertently make mistakes. So it is important, again, to get clued up right at the very start. And I think some kind of key tips that we would normally give, making sure kind of a job description is very specific as to the skills and experience that someone must have, and making sure you advertise wisely. And if you use recruiters, put them to proof as well. How do they ensure diversity? And if you haven't conducted interviews yourself before, it's worth perhaps, again, just taking some legal advice on the proposed questions, as sometimes a seemingly kind of straightforward question can later be argued as being discriminatory. HMRC, just very briefly, so small business owners, payroll can seem a really complex system. So getting it right at the very outset with perhaps the software and a good procedure just helps make things run smoothly. And if you're deciding to do payroll yourself, you'll need to report to HMRC each month with a range of different information. If you have payroll software in place, that'll do the PAYE deductions for you and just reduces the risk of kind of errors and also the admin time. HMRC does have a number of really useful helplines that can be used, and so I'll definitely explore that if you need to. A word on pensions, which could definitely have a whole section to itself. Any employee over the age of 22 earning over £10,000 a year, you have to enrol them in a workplace pension scheme, and it needs to be put in place as soon as you hire your first employee, and there's certain kind of percentages that you'd need to pay into any scheme. There is an option to wait 3 months before auto-enrolling employees, but there's strict criteria for that. So again, looking into that before you start engaging anyone. Right to work checks. So if you recruit someone without first checking that they have the legal right to work in the UK, you are taking the risk of receiving a penalty, and the fines are quite hefty, up to £20,000 per employee. So certainly not something that, you know, a startup would want to have to face or even consider having to dealing with that conversation. So before offering the role to a candidate, make it clear to them the offer is subject to the proof of their right to work, which should be provided before their start date. So most usually you'd have a passport or a residence card. And then follow-up checks are required for those with time-limited permission to work in the UK. So having that clear audit trail. Lastly, on this kind of whistle-stop tour is health and safety. So all employers must comply with the Health and Safety Act. In practical terms, means kind of having a clear health and safety policy, a means for recording accidents and injuries, recorded risk assessments, and just having that clear audit trail in place again. So as lawyers, we love audit trails and paperwork. So it's just making sure that we've kept the record of what we've done. And with more and more people working from home, it's important to remember that those obligations still exist, even with home working, so arranging checks and assessments, albeit virtually, for those home workers. Like I said, very much a whistle-stop tour owing to the time, but we can answer questions after this. But now I'll pass over to Marti, who's going to talk about intellectual property.
Marti, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I've just realised. Sorry about that. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I'm just going to give a brief overview of the different IP rights that may exist in your business and help you protect what you create and maximise your competitive position. First, and some of these rights require registration, others don't. The first one I'm going to talk about are patents. I'm going to do this really briefly because I understand there was an earlier talk today from an actual patent attorney, and we would recommend always that you use a patent attorney. Patents aren't something that us as lawyers generally get involved in. Patents generally protect the technical features of a product or process, so that the patents are there to protect what makes an object work. The next piece of IP I talk about trademarks. These protect your brand name and or your logo. And this is a thing that is used to distinguish your goods and services from others. And you must apply for registration, and it can be renewed every 10 years. If you don't apply for registration, there is an area of law called passing off, which will protect any goodwill you've acquired in a name or a logo. However, if you don't have a registration, the law to protect your brand is just more difficult to prove a case of passing off. Whereas if you've got a trademark, you get your trademark certificate and you can just show it and show the rights that you have over certain types of goods and services. A very sort of complex area of IP is copyright. This generally protects all creative works. So, for example, written documents, artistic works, software. And that covers quite a broad range, and it's not one you can apply to register. There are things you can do to protect it and to prove that you came up with and you put an idea into a fixed form first. However, it's not something you can get a registration over, and is one of the more complicated pieces of IP in that there's not a registration. There's not a registration system. And it doesn't, people often talk about ideas. If you come up with a good idea for a piece of copyright, it's important that you put it in a fixed form. So if you were perhaps in a room with a group of friends and you hummed a tune, if you don't record it and somebody else records it first, they own the copyright. So it's really important to put it into some sort of fixed form and you find some way of dating it. Generally, if it's a piece of something which is hard copy, then you can put it in an envelope, post it yourself, and the postmark will prove that the date you came up with it. But I would say just make sure you keep a written record of when you come up with things. Another area of IP is design rights. This protects how something looks and feels, so it's the appearance of the product rather than how it works. And this can be registered or unregistered, but a registered right gives you a better protection, and it lasts for longer. And it's really important with design rights, and as it is with patents, that you don't reveal it to anyone before you try to seek protection. Because if you disclosed it, and perhaps put an advert out or send pictures of it to someone, then you can't protect it using the registered right, but it can be protected under the unregistered rights. Confidential information, again, this is quite a complicated one, because if you there is a way to protect it without having anything in writing. It's not something you can provide. There is a registration system for, and in certain relationships, somebody will owe you the duty of confidence. However, it is really best if you've got a really good idea and you want to talk to somebody about it, then that's why you use things like non-disclosure agreements, confidentiality agreements. It's really hard. Breach of contract without a written document is a really hard thing to prove. But it's all, so as we would always recommend you put something in writing. As I think we've heard from the others, lawyers, we love paper, but paper is what paper and paper trails are what makes you provides you with good evidence to show that something belongs to you. Okay, I think we're around to questions. That's my quick overview of the intellectual property rights.
Well, thank you very much, Ben and Rachel and Marti. That is an overview, and we will give you the contacts later on, as Ben said, so you can actually find out more. But still very comprehensive. So I've got a couple of questions, and I'm sure there'll be some later on. So I know Ben's joining us later on as well. So what question I want to ask is, firstly, we know that entrepreneurs are very busy. They're busy, growing their business. They're also incredible optimists. They think that somehow it'll all get sorted in the end. And this doesn't always sit on the, feel like it should be on the priority list. So how do you persuade them that this is a priority, that looking at the legal considerations and doing something about them is a priority? And also, have you seen any examples where actually, when you haven't done this, you can see, you've seen real problems down the line? So maybe a couple of sort of real life examples would be great. Marti, should we start with you?
Yeah, I mean, the way we convince people is just tell them some of the horror stories we have to deal with. I mean, Rachel and I work on projects all the time where a shareholder, employee, director, a group of them have gone into business together and there's a fallout, and it may not be any one person's fault, but they've got to the point where they can't work together. If there's a shareholders agreement in place and it has a mechanism for dealing with that kind of fallout, then you just follow the roadmap set out in the shareholders agreement. Without it, you have to rely on pieces of legislation which really don't prepare for this, and so it's quite difficult. And to be honest, that's where lawyers, we can make a lot of money. So I think if we're going to tell people that, warning sign, it's cheaper to have a shareholders agreement than to unpick a relationship between two people who own shares in a business together. So I would always recommend that you put in place a shareholders agreement, or you have a really well drafted set of articles just to set out how you're going to work with each other. And also, just coming up with a shareholders agreement, it kind of flushes out what people's ambitions are to do with the business from the outset. If people you go into business together with a friend, you might be thinking, oh, I'll do this for 5 years and I'll do something else. The other friend might be thinking, this is great, I can do this for the rest of my career. And if you haven't got a mechanism, if you don't have something that flushes that out, then you could end up 5 years' time, one person wants to leave because they've done their 5 years, and the other person wants to continue growing the business.
Good advice, very good sound advice. Thank you, Marti. And talking about the issues, when people do come to you, what are the things that mostly you think that they should make sure that they consider? Is it, what's the most important? Is it equity structure? You were just touching on that. Is it IP? Is it contracts? What do you think are the sort of priorities? Ben, what do you think?
I suppose the lawyer's answer is kind of it depends. And
we were waiting for that.
But it will always change from business to business. As a corporate lawyer, obviously, getting your shares sorted. If you are giving anyone equity, just understanding whether or not you're going to have a mechanism to get that back, what the value is that you're getting as a business for that equity, and whether you're going to have a mechanism so that you're able to get that back. If you're kind of a tech business and you're developing a key piece of software, ensuring that you've got the rights to that piece of software is going to be absolutely key. So it's really kind of looking at where the value is in your business, and looking how to protect that. It's something that we do a lot as lawyers. Is kind of and as part of our starter package is we help people prioritise their legal needs, because we're realistic. You're a startup, you don't have as much as we wish you did have an unlimited budget for legal fees. So you do need to prioritise. You need to focus on one thing at a time, and it's protecting the key value in the business.
One thing at a time, and protecting the key value of your business, and knowing that is really important. Thank you, Ben. So because we're running out of time, I'm going to ask a final question. But as I said, there is an opportunity to contact you for everybody who, I'm sure there's plenty of questions that people are thinking about as they're listening. So we're talking about startups. So your advice that you give to startups at a very early stage. How relevant would some of that advice be for more developed companies, perhaps those that are contemplating an exit? Rachel, is that something, the advice that you're giving, that you've put together, would that be relevant for those companies who are already sort of, coming out?
Yeah, I mean, from a purely employment perspective, I think it's never too late to kind of get everything in order, especially if you're looking to exit, whether that's going to be selling shares or kind of new investors. They're going to want to see that the business is in a healthy shape, and having kind of clear policies, clear contracts is really important to do that. And one thing I'd say lots of people forget at the start out is themselves. So you might have all of your employees, their contracts sorted, their rights, their benefits, but not forgetting kind of your own as the founder, your employment status, kind of your employment terms, because later on, when you're looking to exit, that'll be a lot easier to do if that's got that clear kind of terminology in there that then interplays with kind of shareholders agreement and those other documents. So I think if that isn't in place at the start because something else has taken precedence at that time, there's nothing to stop you turning around later on and still kind of think, well, what else can we do to make sure the audit trail is here, everything's clear, everyone knows what's expected of me, and I know what's expected of everyone. And that really does just reduce the risk of any kind of unnecessary fallouts or arguments later on that can, put a dampener at the end of a potentially a very positive experience, exiting for a positive reason, but then there's issues because of that uncertainty.
So so it's still relevant and still worth thinking about and considering as you go along and talking to you about. That's really, really interesting. The startup package that you talked about, Ben, that's on a website on Bevan Brittan website that people can have a look at. Is that right? How do we find out more about it?
If you want more information, just drop any of us a line. We'll happily talk you through the process.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Marti. I'm sure we'll have more questions coming in, but for the moment, thank you very much.